and welcome to the soft launch of the GSA's Entrepreneurs Club. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Hallard. I'm the Chief Exec of the Global Sourcing Association, and I'm joined today by Joel Walker, who is a fellow council member. So what we're going to do is give you a quick run through what the Entrepreneurs Club is all about, what we're trying to achieve with this, and then we're going to go into a sort of fireside chat between Joel and myself, and we'd like you to get really involved in that conversation. So just a small bit of presentation first, and then we'll go into sort of gallery view and converse a little bit more. So basically we are launching GSA's Entrepreneurs Club for a number of reasons. But to give a bit of context, and you've probably all heard me say this a million times before, you know, we've been so impressed with the way that the industry responded to the pandemic. So partnering around the world didn't just keep the lights on for many organisations, but kept the wheels turning. And that whole mobilisation to working from home and driving digital transformation really delivered fantastic results. And as a result of that, we're seeing a huge amount of tech acceleration and a huge amount of appetite for organisations to invest more and more and more in technology and business services. So we're seeing our industry in a boom mode at the moment, and we do firmly believe that the smaller players that are driving this tech acceleration and digital transformation are going to be so important to our sourcing ecosystem, both to the end enterprise customers, but also to the service providers to be partners with them as they deliver ongoing transformation and innovation to companies around the world. So we wanted to focus on how we could better bring buyers and service providers together. Right, I'm trying to do slide down, page down, let me move on. Yeah, so we believe that the GSA is in a very unique position to actually bring both the buyers of entrepreneurial technology and business services together with the providers and players of technology and business services. So we believe that we can do this through matchmaking and networking, but the real value add to the way that GSA can approach this is that we can do it so it's all absolutely aligned to business, to industry best practice. So we hear a lot from our smaller players in our ecosystem and in our membership about how difficult it is for them to not only get a foot in the door for enterprise companies, but to actually get in, you know, to even be seen by them is incredibly difficult. But then to actually do business with them is really difficult. So we want to make that a lot easier. But then at the same time, we also conversely hear from our enterprise buyer members that they find it really difficult with such a huge number of different players out there, is how do they actually find a reliable company to partner with? So this is one of the main reasons that we are launching our Entrepreneurs Club, is to bring the buyers and the service providers together. So clearly lots of benefits to the small startups, the scale-ups. You know, it will give them opportunity to become part of a very unique community where they can share their ideas, they can align to best practice, they can access tools, templates, best practice, and clearly it's a great forum for them to be able to market their businesses and to grow. But equally, there are huge benefits in this Entrepreneurs Club, we believe, for the enterprise buyers. So the enterprise buyers need to partner with these smaller players to help them to innovate and drive transformation. So the case study that I love to share here is the way that GSK brought smaller players into its sourcing ecosystem and absolutely transformed its business potential. So to give you a brief overview of that particular case study, so GSK, everybody is familiar with the pharmaceutical company. It was number 5 in terms of market share globally, and it slipped to 9th position. So see, the board did a huge sort of like investigation as to what was causing the demise in market share, and this kind of coincided with a time when digital testing was being approved by the regulators, and they soon found out that they were not bringing new products to market anywhere near quickly enough, and new dynamic tech companies were bringing new products to market much quicker than they were able to, and that was actually eating into their market share. They also found out that they were partnering with a number of really large service providers, which they had been partnering with for years and delivered real value, but they weren't being able to bring these new products to market quickly enough. And they weren't attractive to smaller players to actually want to do business with them. So they completely revamped and developed a new sort of sourcing function that was really focused and committed and dedicated to smaller digital technology players. They changed their approach to the RFP and ensured that their RFP was no longer 6 months long, but was 6 weeks long. They changed their contracting process. So contracts had historically been well over 100 pages, and they moved them towards GSK's version of standard terms, which were about 4 pages long. They changed their payment terms, whereas they'd been at 90 days. They changed them to being on average 14 days. And in some instances, they pay on day 0 as a real, investment in trust, but in developing and co-investing in smaller players. So we saw this as fantastic sort of examples of best practice, and we want to develop and build on that best practice for our enterprise buyers to actually share. Next. So, what we're making available to our entrepreneurs is a huge knowledge library. There's lots of video content of the best practice. That's all underpinned by the Global Strategic Sourcing Standard. And there's huge amounts of best practice guides, there's tools and templates. We have made available a whole library of customizable legal frameworks that organisations can use, anything from employment contracts through to subcontract agreements, through to IP assignment undertaking, health and safety policies, data protection policies. So we've developed a really large repository of best practice tools and templates for enterprise buyers to use. We've also obviously broadening out the number of events that we're doing and putting in addition to all of the topical seminars and webinars that the GSA holds, we're actually adding in a portfolio of events specifically for entrepreneurs, and I'll come on to what those events are in a minute. We're also going to be holding buy-side open houses. We're going to get our enterprise buyers to come on in and explain what they're looking for and how you can sell into them in a better way. And obviously the opportunities for buyers are that we're going to be doing matchmaking and giving them sort of like forums and showcases to look at new players and what they've actually got to offer. And then hugely beneficial to both sides is the GSA Partner Platform. So the GSA Partner Platform is something akin to Booking.com, but you're familiar with Booking.com for the hotel industry, I'm sure. But this is actually for software development houses, technology providers, service providers, and it is a way to find proven service providers because they are rated in the system by the positive reviews they've actually had from their customers. Sorry, that's buzzing in my ear. Both the buyers and service providers will get great value from the GSA Partner Platform, and we actively encourage all the entrepreneurial startups and scale-ups to actually get their profile into that partner platform, to ask their existing customers to profile them and review them. And then we're actively promoting that partner platform to our enterprise buyers, saying this is a really good platform to find proven, reliable partners. So another benefit of the Entrepreneurs Club. So I think quickly mentioned what this is. So benefits for the enterprises, as said, is we are going to be doing matchmaking and showcases, but we also are going to be holding buy-side forums, which are going to be opportunities for our enterprise buyers to come together and learn how they are driving their own innovation centres, their own accelerator programs, so that they can learn from the best practice from each other. So one of the key things and really, really important part is that we are firmly aware that at the moment, lots of enterprise buyers in the position that GSK was in are not fit for partnering with smaller companies. There are a number of blockers in place, and there's a lot of changes that they need to make themselves fit for partnering with smaller players. So the GSA has developed an industry code of conduct for working with SMEs. This is very much in a draft form at the moment, and I would be delighted to share it with you so that you can review it and see whether you're in agreement with what we're putting into this code of conduct, and if there's any sort of things you think that might be missing or unrealistic, we'd be delighted to hear. But we have developed our code of conduct around 5 key pillars. And those pillars are culture, procurement, contracts and commercial terms, governance and relationship management. And they include things like we believe that culturally, if you want to partner with SMEs, you need to be really realistic and go into this with mutually aligned objectives and absolutely a win-win mentality. You need to be really mindful of the fact that these smaller companies don't have the time and resource to spend on long RFPs, putting them on the waiting list and not responding to them quickly can be incredibly damaging to those businesses. So you have to be really open and transparent with your feedback and your requirements, and do so with speed. So we're hugely recommending a shortening of RFPs. We're recommending a significant change in due diligence procedures to enable these SMEs to even get onto a potential sort of framework. And of course, you know, it's completely reevaluating your supplier frameworks to fit the size of and turnover of SMEs. You know, we frequently hear that, you know, if an organisation doesn't turn over 50 million, then they can't get in. It's just absolutely ludicrous, some of the blockers and size of the blockers that are actually in place. We're then calling for absolutely a simplification of contracts. We do believe, sadly, that some enterprise buyers are still too abusive in the way that they actually are negotiating across the board, but this is particularly harmful. And when we look at the way that they're actually negotiating with SMEs, these companies really cannot afford to take on the risk and the liabilities that are being asked of them. It's really damaging for the future of their businesses. Shorter payment terms, absolutely imperative. You know, we are publishing we are planning to publish the payment terms of our membership community, and there's, from the research we've done so far, there's still far too many organisations that are paying beyond 60 days. That again is massively harmful for smaller companies. And asking for exclusivity might seem beneficial to the enterprise buyer, but we are highlighting that as absolutely not beneficial, because if you push a small company into any type of exclusivity requirement, then you're being detrimental to their future growth, and that could actually put risk into, you know, your own business results from working with them. We will be promoting and we'll be doing best practice on the use of frameworks for our members, like accelerators and sandboxes, and give them an overview on how to streamline their governance processes to better work with SMEs. And one of the stats that the GSA always promotes is in 85% of cases when outsourced relationships fail, it's due to poor relationship management. So within our code of conduct, we're absolutely promoting the importance of having a dedicated team that really understands the nuances of managing smaller players, and the way that you need to be culturally more adaptive and speedier in response. So a big approach on how to manage relationships with smaller players is going to be coming through in our best practice, as well as a key part of our industry code of conduct. So I talked about what we've got coming up. We have a series of events coming up. We're going to be running events for 1 hour from 4:30 to 5:30 every other Tuesday. And the idea is they're going to be quick tip events, 30 minutes of presentation and 30 minutes of networking and discussion. And we're going to be building up the community over time. So in terms of our lineup, first event is on the 22nd of June, and that's how to respond to an RFP. 6th of July, top tips for SMEs. 20th July, market introduction program and how to get your brand out there. This event on the top tips from SMEs is going to be coming from the buyers. So that's a presentation from enterprise buyers of what they're looking for. Further events, all available on our website, all available for you to register to now. But what we'd like to know is, much more from you as what your challenges as entrepreneurs are and what you need from us in terms of best practice, but in terms of topics and events, and from our enterprise buyers, what else you require from us to make it easier for you to learn how to do business with SMEs. So that's a really quick fire top level run through of what we're planning to achieve and what our intention is with the Entrepreneurs Club. We're now going to go into discussion about it, and I'm joined, as I said before, by Joel Walker from the GSA Council. So I'm going to stop that screen share quickly now. I hope. Tell me when I've stopped it. Yay! So welcome, Joel. I don't know if you want to do a brief introduction to yourself and your background, first of all, just to give some backdrop to it all.
Of course, thank you, Kerry, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Joel Walker, and I've spent the last 10 years leading Vodafone's procurement function in Luxembourg, looking after large areas of our indirect spend and contact centres. Broadly, around €1 billion worth of spend in the indirect space. That's all of our lawyers, legal services, financial services, fleet, travel, HR, training, exec search and relocation, and then all of the usual things around fleet and travel, meetings and events. And prior to that, I've spent probably 15 to 20 years in contact centres, so designing, building and running contact centres for large brands in different parts of the world. So across Europe, South Africa and India. I've lived in India for a few years, and I've been a GSA council member for a while now, and it's a pretty vibrant community. And I think these discussions are really a nice opportunity just to maybe share a little bit of that experience, to try and stimulate a little bit of debate amongst the community around how we can do things better, both from a corporate perspective, which I guess is the hat I wear for the purposes of this session, but also, as a former sort of head of a global procurement function, we've been trying to do some more innovative things in this space, and some of that we'll unpack over the next half an hour or so, I think. And maybe just a quick comment on what's to follow with Kerry. And I guess we really want this to be a conversation. So whilst it's a little warm for a fireside chat, it's ideally a chance for some people to bounce ideas off, to float things into this session. So we're quite a small group. It's a trusted, safe space. And I think there's really an opportunity for us to start to open up that dialogue now, because we're at the very start of the journey in terms of that Entrepreneurs Club. So it needs to be sort of influenced by the membership, and some of you joined today, I'm sure will have some views on that. So be looking forward to sort of teasing that out over the course of the next half hour or so.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can put digital hands up or put comments in the chat, we will bring you into the conversation. But to kick things off, I'm going to have a bit of a conversation with you, Joel, about your experiences. Do enterprise buyers, organisations like Vodafone, do we do enough with SMEs, and how difficult do you believe it is for SMEs to get into organisations like your own?
I probably wouldn't be here if I thought everything was okay, and I think this is a sign of intent on my part, and or at least an acknowledgement that we've not done enough over my time in a sort of global leadership role. I think the intent is often there, and I think the ambition is often there. And certainly over the course of the last 18 months to 2 years, the narrative is starting to change now around a recognition of the role that SMEs can play in the sort of wider supplier ecosystem. I think that's true, particularly in the UK, where the government are sort of trying to stimulate a percentage of their own spend to be going to SMEs. So they're sort of trying to put their money where their mouth is, etc. So the SME make up such a valuable part of the economy, and again, it depends on what stats you read, but it's upwards of 95%, 96, 97% of all employment in the UK is with people in SMEs, and I think whilst that's very encouraging, sadly a large number of those SME businesses fail. Often within the first year, and there's obviously a variety of reasons for that, but I think large enterprises haven't been doing enough to embrace the opportunity that expertise that's locked up within those SME organisations offer. So I think the code of conduct's a good starting point. I think unpacking the real ways of working as an industry and starting to be more impactful in changing people's behaviour, both on the buy and the sell side, I think will start to make a material difference to both sides of the organisation. I can keep going, but feel free to jump in. But it's a bit of a, I don't want to preach too much, but I am genuinely very passionate about it, and I think there's a sort of oversimplification in large enterprises that we need fewer suppliers, and managing purchase orders through a system has a cost associated to it. But I think it is, as I say, it's a gross oversimplification that more suppliers equals more cost, because I think actually some of the larger firms have a cost associated to them just because of the sort of the economics of their global model doesn't necessarily make them cheaper. So I think large enterprises have sort of have failed to embrace that opportunity as well as they could have done. I think that oversimplification is changing, as I say, and I think there is now a realization that for big brands to thrive, they need to be more innovative and they need to be more agile. And in both of those terms, agile and innovative, working with that SME community is often one of the very easiest ways of delivering on your business objectives. Trying to plug two global corporates together to be innovative, we've seen time and time again, generally fails.
So don't want to sort of just make this all completely focused on Vodafone, but from your experience, what should large organisations do differently to make it so much easier to partner with SMEs? What kind of bits of advice would you give of quick changes to make? Is it exactly what we've been putting in the code of conduct, or?
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
So quick changes from the SME community, or quick changes in the enterprise space? Sorry.
In the well, both, but I'm asking about the enterprise space at the moment.
So I think in the enterprise space, that we shouldn't overestimate the importance of both of discovery, and I think one of the largest challenges facing that SME population is just that they exist in an unknown world where big large enterprises aren't aware of them. They don't have the marketing budgets, they don't have the track record or the brand, and therefore it's very difficult for them to lift themselves up onto the radar of a category manager looking after a learning and development area of spend, or a facilities area of spend, or whatever that piece of innovation that or project that needs doing. So I think from a procurement perspective, there's good excuses around why category management hasn't been able to uncover that lower level, and there's a lot of resellers in this space, a lot of aggregation, a lot of sort of long tail procurement solutions that often hide away from large enterprises, those smaller SME organizations. But I think they are excuses, as I say, and I think there have to be some ways of properly exploring the real availability of opportunities from the SME population by getting into the market and understanding it. And I think the easiest way of doing that are for SMEs to be, aligning themselves to organisations like the Global Sourcing Association. I think the Entrepreneurs Club is a great platform for that. It's not going to fix everything, but it's starting to move SME organisations into the spotlight. And I think once they're in the spotlight, then all of the advantages that they offer in terms of energy, enthusiasm, intellectual ideas, etc., come to the fore. And I think that's when they start to be discovered. So I think there's a challenge around visibility from the SMEs, but I also think there's an obligation on enterprises to start to rethink where they're getting their bid lists from. So if you need a product or service, you will typically run an RFP with 4 to 6 suppliers. You might start with an RFI of 10, 12, 15 suppliers to start to understand what's out there. But generally you'll be missing a number of SMEs from that. There will typically be the people that you know. So I think that first dimension we can't overlook is around visibility. I think once that visibility is established and they're in the process, I think all of the things that you've said are true, and the GSK case studies really sound around re-engineering their organization to be able to accommodate and be more attractive to large enterprises. And I think we also need to remember where the power lies in these discussions sometimes, because I think the assumption that the large enterprises are all powerful and the sort of the SMEs are this timid little force, I think is perhaps a little not misguided, but I think is an oversimplification of the paradigm, because I think actually where some of these SMEs have got something that's either unique or very special, then actually they do hold a lot of the power in those conversations with the large enterprises and can start to be driving the discussions a little bit more, because if their product is that good, then they have the choice of who to sell that product to. And whilst of course as a salesman you might want to think, well, I'll sell this product to everyone, actually some of those SMEs are operating in quite an exclusive space, so that's where you may or may not want to be offering exclusivity into the supplier base. Now, as we said, as part of the code of conduct from an enterprise perspective, I don't think we should be enforcing exclusivity as much as we perhaps have been, because it then undermines the SME's business model. So I think if we think about visibility, we then think around the access to innovation. I think the third piece is just around the contracting and commercial models. And again, I've spent a long time at Vodafone, and when I arrived, we had a 150-page contract. Over time, we got that to what we used to call a light version, which was 45 pages. And then over time, we've sort of got that down to standard PO terms of a page, but actually a meaningful contract we can now execute in sort of under 10 pages. And it doesn't necessarily have all of the protections and warranties and liabilities defined out that large enterprises might be used to agreeing with other large enterprises. But I think there needs to be a much greater accommodation to smaller enterprises and to SME businesses, and making it easier to do business with. You can't onboard a SME and expect the same level of insurance and GDPR protections and liability insurance and warranties that you would get with dealing with a tier 1 global brand. So I think that's part of the agility bit, just building on your GSK example. I think the last part is just around the process not being too burdensome. So you touched on the RFP process going from sort of 6 months to 6 weeks. I think that in the digital age, we'll start to see those processes being executed in days. So I think there are blockchain solutions emerging now with this sort of authentication of you as an organization, which is sort of stored in the in not turning this into a blockchain seminar, but into in the cloud, let's just call it that. And then that allows for a lot faster, response to processes. If you're a SME, it's a very time-consuming process to respond to an RFP, and you need to be, certainly if you're not doing it very often, it's a very time-consuming process. And I think there are now some digital solutions emerging that allow SMEs to get through that process a lot more quickly. So I would hope that the increasing role of digital technology in the sourcing process presents opportunities for both sides of the buying process, the buy and the sellers, but specifically the SME community.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps that's one, Abby, we should actually add into the agenda, is looking at those technologies in the sourcing process. So action for you. So could you give us a little bit of an overview of what your organisation has actually done and changed? I know you talked about contracts, but maybe in terms of your due diligence and things like that you've done differently to make it easier for SMEs to get on in.
Yeah. So I think, firstly, just in terms of, again, this is not an advert for Vodafone, but I think this has been a tough year for all manner of businesses. And I think, the Vodafone's UK offering up sort of free broadband for SMEs is being very well received by a number of organisations in the UK as a sort of sign of of Vodafone's ambition to stimulate that and protect and nurture that SME community through the storm. And again, it's done other great things around payment terms. So working capital is the lifeblood of any enterprise, and there are obviously advantages typically by extending out those payment terms. But I think we've made a very conscious commitment again over the last 18 months around dramatically reducing those. So again, similar to GSK, 14 days. In other cases, it can be shorter than that. But I think any large enterprise in the UK and that's subject to the prompt payment code should, just as part of good practice, be paying promptly. And I think there's a distinct difference between the terms that you agree in the contract and then the terms that you actually pay. So you need to make sure that there's no gap there, because again, some of the times you can start to see, well, we've put them on 14-day payment terms, but we're paying them at 28 still. So I think we need to, as a large corporation, you need to stand behind the brand promises that you're making around being easy to do business with SMEs, and payment terms is a very visible manifestation of that. So it's the lifeblood for that small organisation, and it's more crucial than ever when there's an economic storm raging that they're properly financed, and we need to respect our role in that. And that goes not just to the payment terms themselves, but the amounts that are being paid. So it's very easy to try and crush a desperate small innovative supplier who's trying to build scale into a way that and getting them to sign up to a model that's not sustainable for them economically. And again, that's not healthy for the wider SME ecosystem or for the relationship more generally. So I think again, there's a more maturity of thought that's emerging now around not necessarily trying to extract every last piece of value out of it, but starting to think about things like co-creation funds or partnership funds, where you'll feel free to squeeze until you get a price that both parties are comfortable with, but then look to give something back with sort of innovation funds, relationship funds, innovation budgets that allow both parties to start to set an agenda, and it allows you to start to influence the research and development and the technology roadmap of the partners. But it's also a nice way of giving back and again protecting the ecosystem from some of the ravages of poor working capital practice. I think you also asked about what are the things that we're doing or that we're doing or other organisations are doing, but I would suggest that no organisation is doing enough. So some of the onboarding processes, as I say, are just incredibly time consuming. And if you're a small entrepreneur that's not got a huge sales and marketing team and an account team and a bid management team, if you're in that place, is that time that you're spending responding to RFPs is time that you're not spent on innovation or staffing or marketing or product development, etc. Now, of course, sales are a crucial part of your business process, but I think that large enterprises like Vodafone and other big brands have a responsibility to be fast and clear in their sourcing processes. So we touched earlier on 6 weeks, and for me, even that's not long enough. Sorry, even that's too long, not short enough. Because I think the technology exists now, and the sort of digital marketplace exists now to make these almost instantaneous transactions, and that's not necessarily around, well, put your entire product catalog up into Amazon and use that sort of platform. But there are a lot of smarter solutions available now that I think we'll start to see more and more of in the coming years, that offer SMEs a much more effective route into marketplaces, and those marketplaces are becoming more attractive to large enterprises just because of the nature of the suppliers that they find within that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've said a number of things there that are really quite interesting, and that is, understanding what is the right price point, so not nailing your providers to the floor or over negotiating with them, but then also the whole sort of like focus of best practice for enterprise buyers to do innovation hubs and co-invest, so that there's benefits that we could develop as the GSA for both sides. It's just like, what is a realistic price point, or how do you do, innovation hubs? Do you think our industry is mature enough and ready enough to actually share those sort of levels of best practice and data to help these communities? Or do you think we're still too much in a sort of like a protective mode of, what we're doing, we want to keep to ourselves?
I don't think it's anywhere close to mature enough. I think we've seen that, time and time again, that I think that organizations need to be a lot smarter than they have been. Are we mature enough to be sharing data? I think there are question marks around the sort of transparency and integrity of both sides of the buying and selling processes that I think put some of that that present challenges, but I don't think any of those challenges are insurmountable. I think, again, this is not an advert for the GSA, but that the GSA has over the years created an environment that brings buyers and sellers together in a safe and respectful way. And it's not just a platform for salespeople to get their hands on buyers and for buyers to challenge sellers, but it is an environment where the dialogue can happen in a controlled and sensible way around what really are the motivations of a global procurement function versus what are the motivations of the sales teams and the sales organizations. And I think there are a number of bits of work that are building towards the symposium later in the year that are distinct documents that say, this is from a buy side perspective, this is from a sell side perspective, our approach to contracting and to commercial models and to what good looks like in customer experience delivery or whatever that might be. So I think we need to strip away some of the fear that exists around leaking intellectual property and starting to have a genuine conversation as adults in an appropriate fashion and subject to all of the appropriate competition law, and I'm not suggesting the creation of cartels, but I think there has to be this healthier dialogue between both sides, and you can't always do that within the sourcing process itself. And I think large enterprises are often almost always in a sourcing process. It's a constant state of buying, and the sales functions are in a constant state of selling. So I think an environment where organizations can safely step into and have that conversation around sharing data, to your point, Kerry, I can't see why that wouldn't be a good thing for us as an industry.
Right, I'm going to invite conversation in really from the people we've got in the audience. I know there's some friendly faces in there. So William and Matt, I wonder if you could sort of like share your views on what you're seeing. So William, you've come off mute, so I'll ask you first.
Yeah, I think for me, the reality is that this is a brilliant step forward. And the reason for that is having worked with startups myself, and Matt would also, I'd say, reflect on the same area, that what's really needed is a way for these to get an entry point into working with much more established organizations. I think one of the things that perhaps is another area that the GSA could visit is something around the VC aspect to some of these elements around the SMEs, because one of the challenges for a lot of startups going up to scale up and into the SME model is that they have pressures on VC, and there might be that as much as you have a code of conduct between SMEs and larger formed businesses, I think it may also be something that they could give some angle on, how do you work with your VC as you approach some of the opportunities in the market for you as a business. The other thing I would add is there's genuinely so much happening in terms of agility, and I know it's a word that's getting bashed about like a baseball these days, but it's absolutely true. There's so much agility out there at the moment, and it does come from many organizations that right now are the ones that can move quickly to meet the demands of whether it's customers or people that need IT infrastructure. We're seeing it in our industry. Some of the other industries I work with, one of them is in the charity function, where we've created a QR code that is basically scans and opens an open banking app that immediately allows you to get straight through to donate without using a platform at all. Now that's great for the charities because they're 77% cheaper than using PayPal or anybody else. But the reality is, when you go to a charity and have these kinds of discussions, sometimes because you're a new business in a new sector, even though the simplicity is evident, and the fact that it's all under the right kind of auspice, the right kind of regulation, you're still not the kind of organization that maybe has the right language to speak to those kind of larger corporates. And again, I think the GSA has an ability to support in, here's the kind of tone of voice you need, here's the kind of language you need, which certainly I found very valuable from the GSA over the years, because that allows you then to enter into those procurements, knowing what the right language is, knowing what the right pain points might be for the corporate in terms of trying to bring you into their circle of trust, as it were. So I think there's lots that GSA has got to offer in that regard.
So it sounds like we're on track with two of those events. One is really looking at the market introduction program and how best to promote your brand, and the second is looking, I think it might be in the other order actually, is looking at how you actually respond to an RFP. So we are doing quick hits on both of those subjects. But yeah, moving and working with VCs is something that we've steered away from so far, because I think there's just so many events on how to work with VCs, which is slightly outside of our area of expertise. But if everybody thinks it's something that they'd find really beneficial, then we'd be more than happy to put that one into our agenda. So Matt, any comments from you?
Yeah, morning everybody. Thanks, Kerry. Joel, you and I have known each other for probably 20 years, which is a scary statistic in itself. During that period of time, I predominantly worked for corporates, large corporates, and there was reference earlier on to contractual risk. And I've been surprised over the last couple of years, having made the brave and sensible decision to move away from corporate life in many regards, and working with smaller, medium-sized organizations. And I just wondered, from a corporate perspective, well, let me backdrop the statement before I conclude. I've been surprised over the last couple of years just what level of risk small and medium-sized organizations have been prepared to take in contracts. And that for me has been quite enlightening, and enlightening in a number of ways. These companies are either more or less risk challenged, or B, these organizations work on the basis that if something happens, they'll deal with it when it happens. And for me, the latter of those is obviously the scariest of the two. So I just remove Vodafone from your reply, because I prefer your reply rather than the Vodafone one. But just how do you, what's your perception of that in terms of, are these onerous corporate-minded contracts really putting medium-sized organizations in a position where they'll just sign anything to win business and then deal with the legal challenge at the point that it happens? Is that good for the shareholder overall?
I think it's a leading question, and to follow it to its conclusion, I think we often argue the most about the clauses in a contract that we use the least. And if you look at what the sticking points are typically in a big or small deal, but the big deals that my team and I have led over the last number of years, what you often come down to are a set of issues around a gap around warranties or insurances or liabilities. And there are very good reasons that those are important topics, especially in a post-GDPR world where there are growing risks for enterprises generally. However, what we've seen again just to close the point, what we've seen perhaps over the last 12 months, though, is a realization that actually the spirit of the contract, or the letter of the contract, isn't as important as the spirit of the contract. And actually, if COVID has proven anything as an exceptional event, it's that the contracts weren't worth a lot when they were actually tested, because you can imagine when suddenly everyone's locked at home and not allowed out, and you sit around the boardroom and ask, well, what are our suppliers contractually obliged to do? It's like, well, is this an act of God? Is it not? Is it a force majeure? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And I think actually what you saw then from all enterprises was a level of collaboration and solution focus that put the contract to one side and actually got on with ensuring that the customer was supported, or the product was delivered, or the service was maintained. So I think that realization that there could be a refreshed level of trust between buyer and seller, I think, is a step forward. And Matt, I'm not avoiding your question, but to the specific part of your question, Matt, around is that a good thing? I think enterprises build up levels of protection. They put, a level of protection is like a suit of armor, but you never tend to take that armor off, and you just put layer upon layer upon layer. And no one, I don't think, sets out to have a 60, 100, 200, multi-100 page contract. But what tends to happen is, over time, different things get layered in, and that becomes the default. You go again, well, actually, this didn't quite work, and you just end up layering protection upon protection upon protection, and actually, then it becomes such an adversarial sourcing process that actually you lose sight during that process of why you want to be working with each other in the first place, which is because of the uniqueness of the supplier and so I think, of course, there has to be a reawakening and a reimagining of how those contracts can look. And again, I think that's some of that is being led by the GSA, and that's why I'm sort of proud to sort of associate myself to it, because I think it's an absolutely worthy ambition to try and work towards a better agreements.
Yeah, David, is that David Jones? David's on mute.
It is, yes. Sorry, I've just come off mute.
Yeah, so it's quite timely to bring you in on this one, because obviously you're part of our contracting work stream and working with us towards standard terms. So I just wondered if you want to share your view on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kerry. And hi, everyone. I'm David Jones. I have a software platform which is for contracting, and I feel quite strongly about this point, because I think Joel, you just to my mind, summarised it perfectly there, which is that quite often you get a document through and it's 100, it's 200 pages long, and you're left as a sort of prospective supplier thinking, do I take a punt and just sign it and hope it'll all be good, or do I spend what could be 5-10 grand getting it legally reviewed? And when you've got no guarantee you're going to win the work, I think probably the first option is quite tempting at times. So I think this piece is one that we're sort of entering into, and with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of sort of goodwill from everyone in the group, because I think there's an acknowledgement that we can absolutely give some pointers to what we think is industry standard and reasonable, so that the positions that we're putting out there are, they're going to be some variable points. An agreement by definition isn't something that's sort of a one size fits all, but to put some parameters around what is an egregious set of terms and what is kind of what we'd expect to be up for debate in a normal commercial conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at the GSA are running a contracting work stream, which is focused on 3 different areas. But one area is really looking at how to develop the smart contract. Another is looking at how we, how we can move more towards sort of like the use of some standard clauses. So, so that will be work that we'll be presenting at our symposium towards the end of this year. So. Anything else that we should be looking at doing differently? I was just wondering if there's anybody in the audience that is with a smaller organisation and is facing challenges that they'd be willing to share. So Gagana, I don't know if you'd be willing to share any challenges that you've been facing. It's always a risky thing, isn't it? Just picking on people and hoping that they'll say something. But yeah, Pratish.
Hi, Kerry. Hi, Joel. Hi, everyone. I think the launch of the Entrepreneurs Club is certainly a pivotal one for the SME market, and there's no specific challenges. I would just be eager to know what the GSA partner network looks like, so that it can obviously match the buyers and suppliers and how that relationship will work moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a growing sourcing ecosystem. In the past we have predominantly been working with the larger FTSE 250 sort of enterprise buyers, but then on the service provider and support side, it'd be anything from the large global service providers, the Indian heritage players, all the way through to potentially one-man bands. So but what we are moving to do and trying to achieve with the Entrepreneurs Club is to further broaden that sourcing ecosystem and to also move into the mid-tier for the enterprise buyers. So that's an active program that is underway at the moment. Gagana, you are now flashing.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had a problem with my mic. Yeah, hello from my side, Girgana. I am from FlowLogic. This is a startup company that is focused on business process outsourcing. Now, first of all, congratulations for building this platform. I think it will be very beneficial for companies like ours, because what we are experiencing at the moment as a super fresh company at the market is actually that the big companies are usually working with already approved vendors for all kind of services, and there is almost no way for a small new company on the market to join as a sub-vendor or approved vendor to those companies. And it's kind of I think a benefit for the companies to at least evaluate the opportunities, because for example in many areas we are faster in delivering all kind of services. We are cheaper for sure, but those kind of restrictions are really interrupting both sides, I think. So it is from my side very beneficial to kind of educate the big companies about the benefits of working with small ones, or at least evaluate the options to work with.
Absolutely. So what sort of challenges are you exactly experiencing? You just can't actually get a foot in the door, or when you get the foot in the door, you have the blockers that you're too small, you don't pass their due diligence?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. The first and the second, actually. Because you know people on the market, you can always call somebody and say, and ask them just to introduce you, for example, but after that actually nothing happens because of the policies that they have, the internal ones, and they have built kind of internal ecosystems working only with specific providers, and that's it. There's nothing you can do. You can subcontract with some of the already approved contractors, but this is also not an easy thing to do.
No, absolutely. So I think this goes to last word to you, Joel, is last words of advice to help organizations like Gaganas?
Be persistent. So I think, I think anyone that starts a business is very brave. Anyone that's sort of leading a SME organization has a wealth of other challenges, and selling a great product shouldn't be one of them. So just keep being persistent, essentially. That doesn't mean badger the procurement function on a daily basis, but start just trying to evolve a sensible dialogue with the target organization. I sometimes feel that things can be a little bit of a scattergun, and it's just like we're going to blast this message out and hope it lands, and I think that sort of machine gun approach isn't very effective when you're looking in on large organizations. You need to be a little bit more like a sniper. So choose your opportunities, research them properly, and target the message, and as I say, just be persistent.
Thank you.
You've got the industry code of conduct, which I'll share with you, but it's something that you can be putting forward to the larger organisations. It's a voluntary code of conduct, and we will. It's not mandatory, but we will be policing it. So if you find that you're dealing with organisations that are hugely wasting your time or have unfair practices, then you can highlight those to the GSA, and we will be working with them in a soft way to actually get them to understand, the ways they can actually get huge value into their own organisations by changing their own processes and practices for working with SMEs. So that's one of the key focuses for the GSA with this industry code of conduct. It is there to benefit both, absolutely to benefit both sides. So we're at time. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your insights, Joel. Much appreciated. And thank you everybody else for joining us. We will share the industry code of conduct with you. And there is work that we're doing across our other work streams that really dovetails into this Entrepreneurs Club. So there is the work we're doing on simplifying contracting, but there's also the work that we're doing within the Council for Supplier Diversity UK. So there we're really looking at helping our members better understand the diversity of their supply chains, and obviously SMEs within that are hugely important. So we are launching a survey to understand from our members if they really know what level of makeup they have in their supply chain of SMEs, and then start developing and producing an overview of what is best practice for the makeup of SMEs in their supply chains. So yes, I say the work that dovetails in across the GSA. So thank you very much again, Joel. Thank you very much for you guys for joining us, and we'll be in touch shortly. And the next event is in 2 weeks' time. So hope to see you there as we continue to promote this important agenda and start sharing the best practice behind it all. Have a good day. Thank you.